everybody. So the first thing that we're going to be doing is starting with the color layer. I'm going to list at the beginning here of the colors that I'm going to be using. I'm going to be starting off with just a layer of alizarin crimson. She has, you know, a lot of red in her jester costume. So I put a little bit of liquid original just to give it a more smooth application. And I'm covering her entire costume with just the alizarin crimson. And as you see where I've already got that underpainting, the shadows are coming through very nicely. And I know that I don't have her feet so far in the painting, and I will be, you know, putting that in shortly. But just so you know, I know that that's not there. So I'm just going to cover the entire area with that alizarin crimson. And that's the one thing that I really like about doing that underpainting process first, is that if you put a light glaze over top of the underpainting, you can see that it's already giving more depth. And I'm not having to do anything but just put one solid color on there at the moment. So I'm looking back and forth at the reference photo to make sure that I'm putting the color on the correct side. And this is something that's really out of my comfort zone. I normally don't do any type of comic characters, but I thought it would be something fun and different to do for the channel. So I said, hey, why not? One thing that I had an issue with is when I started to do this painting, it is a 9x12 painting, I realized that I didn't have any small enough detail brushes. The smallest that I have is actually a 0 flat, and it wasn't small enough. So I actually took some scissors and I cut a couple of brushes to size to kind of make more of a finer detail brush that I was needing for this painting. Now once I got the highlights, once I got the alizarin crimson in there, I'm going to go in with just some white and go over those highlight areas. Now the reason why I'm not trying to mix in a special color is because I already have that first layer of alizarin crimson all over the entire painting. So once I put that white on, it's going to actually mix with that alizarin that's underneath, giving me this really nice pink color. So I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the black part of her costume. And here I mixed the alizarin. Here I actually mixed some ivory black with some ultramarine blue. And the reason why I did that is because it gives me a very nice dark black color without being matte. One of the main issues with black is that when it dries, it does have a very matte finish to it, and it's not pretty. It's not nice to look at. It's not appealing to the eyes. But if you mix in some of that blue, then it really gives a nice depth to the painting that you're wanting. And a good thing is because I did put a blue in there, when I go over it with a white, it's going to give me a nice blue, which is a great highlight color for black. So it's making something that could be extremely difficult into something that's really easy. And with all these colors, I did individually mix in my liquid original. Sometimes I like to oil out the entire painting of what I'm doing. But with this one, I decided to just go ahead and just mix it as I went. And as you see now, I'm starting to put white, but only white, and it's giving me this nice bluish, grayish tone, which is perfect for highlight for black. And the light source is coming from the right side here. That's something to really make sure that you pay attention to, is where your light source is coming from. And one thing about white, I use titanium white, and it's very opaque. So a little bit goes a long way. Be very sparing with it. put a little dab on there, grab a clean brush, and blend it out a little bit. You can always add more, but with white, once you put it on there, it's really hard to get it back off. You're going to have to let it dry and then come back in with another color. But as you can see here with my highlights, it looks really good using the black and the ultramarine blue mixed together. It gives a really nice highlight. And I'm really only using 3 colors, so it's simple. Anybody can do it, and it looks really good. I'm moving on to the top part of the jester costume here, making sure that I get those highlights in. And be careful, you don't want to lose your darks as you put in those highlights. This is the last area. I'm just taking a little bit of white, getting a nice chiseled edge on that flat brush, and doing a swooping motion to give a nice gradient from the light to the dark. And here I'm going back in and adding a little bit brighter of a highlight by just adding a little bit more white. Moving on to the hands. And you know, the hands, they were pretty easy to do. Most of them were hidden by the different objects in the painting. So I just mainly put in a little bit of black and just did some little highlights with the white. Going back in with any areas that I think maybe could benefit from a little bit more brightness, and just adding white to these areas and blending it out. That I get some shape to the body here, because she is, you know, resting her elbow there on her hip, so I want to make sure that I get that bending of the torso with the painting there. It's really important. A lot of people are scared to go a little too bright or a little too dark, but to make a painting look realistic and to make it look good, you really have to have that contrast between your lights and your darks. And here with the little fluffy white balls of the costume, I took that ivory black and ultramarine blue and I added a lot of white to it. I want to try to keep the same colors. I don't want to go too complicated with the colors that I'm using, so I just added a lot of white in there, but I don't want it to be white. I don't want to get my brightest brights and my darkest darks at this part. I am just blocking in at this stage. I'm going back through and adding a little bit more dark now that I got the white part on there on the chest, just to give it a little bit more dimension. I kind of felt like I was starting to lose the shape of the ball, so once I put that dark underneath, it really made that stand out a lot more, like it was actually setting on top of her chest. Using that same color there to fill in all of these white areas. Alright, now I'm moving on to this, I guess it's a mallet that she's using. And I'm putting one entire base layer of, what color did I use? I used burnt umber for this. Keep it thin, you know, put your liquid original in there, make sure that it's a glaze, and that way your underpainting will show through. You did the underpainting for a reason. A, it was for a map as a guide to help you as you do these next few layers, but it also adds an entire layer of depth to your painting if you allow it to. If you go too thick with your paint, you're going to lose all that first day of painting that you did. And now I'm going in with some yellow ochre, and I'm just lining along the top part of the handle there and the top part of the mallet. Hammer. I don't really know what you call that. And it's giving a very nice highlight there. Now I'm coming in with a little bit of white mixed in with that burnt umber, just to give a nice little highlight to that area. Don't want to go too bright just yet. Right, now I'm moving on back to the body. I've noticed that, because like I said, you've got to make sure that you get things dark enough and light enough. Now with the light source coming from the right, I wanted to make sure that that left side was dark enough. I already have the alizarin crimson on there, so I already have my red. So a very good color for a shadow color for red is actually purple. So what I did, since I already had the red on there, is I took a little bit of that ultramarine blue and just with a very, very small amount, use that to add in a shadow color. And we know that when we mix in red and blue, we get purple. Now moving on to the face, this is the same color that I used for the other white part, with just a little bit more hint of blue. Excuse me, a little bit more hint of blue in there. And I'm just applying this all over the face, and then I'm going to add in a little bit of lights and darks in there. And I will simply do that by adding in a little bit more light, or taking it a little bit more to the bluer side by adding a little bit more of the ultramarine blue in there. I'm using the same dark color of the black that I used, the black and the ultramarine, to do the mask part around the eyes. And this is the point of the painting where I actually had to take some scissors and cut down some brushes to get into this area. If you're going to do paintings this small with this much detail, I definitely would recommend buying some detail brushes. Normally for a painting that's a 9x12, it would probably just be like a headshot for me. But for this person, they wanted to have two people in there with a microphone, and you can only get so much detail when you go small. And for someone like me that I am so detail oriented, I really like to focus on those details. It was very hard for me to not overdo it, but there comes a point in the painting where you have to say, okay, I need to stop. There's nothing else that I can do. I cannot get any more detail into this painting with the size that it is. And I think it's very important as an artist that you know when to stop. So now I'm going in with just a little bit of white to start getting in the highlights on the white areas of the painting. And like I said, normally I wouldn't just use white, but it is mixing and blending in with that other color that I already put as the base. So it's not going to be the solid white. You'll get that solid white after this dries, and when you put white on, it will really still pop. Make sure that you're not getting those brightest brights and darkest darks just yet. And I'm going through and just, trying to make sure that I do it in the areas where I can envision that a light source is coming down at. And as you see, it's really starting to take shape. With the whites there, you're starting to kind of see the folds as I put those highlights in. Even though when I first did it, it looked like it was all white. This is something that I really like to do. I normally would have done this first, and I just forgot. But I always like to do my backgrounds during this stage of the painting. I find that whenever you don't want to have that halo effect over your subject, and if you put in your background first, This is the part of the painting where I really like to do that because I don't want to get that halo effect. And I find that if you put the background on when you're blocking in, that it lets you, with the hairs and the wispiness of the hairs or whatever it is that you're needing to do, if you already have the background done during the next part of the painting, it's so much easier to get those effects in because you've already got the background in. So you can go right over the background. It's going to look natural. It's not going to look like, you've got this halo going over it and it looks like the painting, they just don't go together. So I find that if you do your background during the second part, that it's the best time to do it, no matter what your subject is. I really wish that I would have done it in the beginning before I even started Harley, but honestly I just forgot. But I'm doing it now before I start on Drew. Getting right up to the subject. It's okay if it goes over, and it's okay if it, it kind of mixes in, because in the next part of the painting, after this part dries and you're starting to add in more detail, you can go right over that background and you can reshape it, you can add those colors back in, and it's okay. It's okay to go over onto your subject. The last thing that you want is that halo effect, as I was talking about. Now with this painting, I did go through a few different backgrounds. I was like, oh, well, maybe I'll put in some, like a light shining down like they're on a stage, and I added some white, and it looked horrible because I added too much white, and I had to wait and let it dry, and then I had to go back over it again, and I decided just to use that ivory black mixed with some ultramarine blue. It gave me a very nice, deep black color, exactly what I was looking for, and I should have left it alone when I first started. But that's how you learn. Sometimes you have this vision in your head of how a painting should look, and then you do it and you're like, oh no, what did I just do? That looks horrible, and you have to redo it, and that's just part of the process. But one of the great things about using oil is it is very forgiving. Brush here so I can get into those areas a little bit better. I always try to use my bigger brushes first and then go down to the smaller brushes as needed. Because that is one thing with the Liquid Original. You have about 2 hours of painting, at least for me. I have about 2 hours that I can do painting before it starts to dry on me and starts to get tacky, and then I'll have the issue of maybe paint coming up if I'm trying to continue to paint. So that's something just to keep in mind. If you do use some type of fast drying medium, pay attention to how long it starts to, when it actually starts to dry on you. Make sure that you stop. You could ruin your painting if you don't stop. Give it till the next day. It's okay to let it set and let it wait, and then wait. And then a lot of times if you walk away from a painting after a couple of hours, you come back and you're like, oh yeah, I see something that I missed here. And so a lot of times it works in your benefit. And as you can see here with Harley, with her arm that's coming up to the microphone, something that I didn't notice when I was doing this is that I actually brought that black up from the background up too high and cut off some of her arm. And I fixed that later on in the painting, but it's something that I didn't notice, because when you're just staring at something for so long, little details like that can get away from you. And then you don't realize it until you actually have time to step away from it and reevaluate it and look at it again. And then you're like, oh my goodness, how did I not miss that in the first place? I got on the computer and kind of got a general shape for her feet and the boots that she wears. So I'm just doing in a fast blocking in layer here of those shoes and shapes, using the same colors that I used in the costume. And as you see here with the shoes, this is a great example. There was no underpainting to show here, you know, what the shoes look like, and you can see a huge difference between using the alizarin crimson with nothing underneath. There's no depth there, which, you know, for this part it was easy to fix, but it really shows the difference between when you actually use an underpainting and when you don't use an underpainting. And now I'm going in with that background color and just filling in the shape, the bottom parts of her ankles, and filling in that area, and then filling in the rest of the background. And now I'm just going to take white to add in a little bit of highlights, and you can see it's already starting to take shape. Same thing with the other side. I wiped my brush, got that blue off, got a little bit more white, and started to shape the bottom of her. Now I'm just going to add in those final highlights, look over it, see if there's anything that's kind of standing out to me. And at this point, you know, I don't see anything, even though I've cut off, you know, a portion of her arm there. And that's why it's good to just sometimes just walk away. Start talking about the microphone. You know, this is something that is just, you know, kind of good to know how to do, and that's just getting the metal. Now I'm reshaping it first with using that background color, because it, you know, I just wanted to have that as nice a straight of line as I can. I have covered the entire area with the same color that I used for Harley's face. You know, it's just that ultramarine blue, ivory black, and quite a bit of white. It gives me a very nice cool gray color, and I put that over the entire part there of the microphone that you can see, and then I darkened it up a little bit with just the ivory black and the ultramarine blue, and I'm going to put that on the left side of the microphone, and then I'm going to get white and I'm going to put that on the right side of the microphone. And when you do that, it's going to give those contrasting colors that you need. Any painting or anything that you're painting will need at least 3 colors. You need to have your mid-tone. That's the first thing that I like to paint in, is I like to look for that middle tonal color that you see. So I put that in first, and then I take that mid-tone color and then I start mixing in a little bit, make it a little bit to the darker side, and then I make a little bit more with the wider side, and it's usually just adding in, you know, depending on the color, but like with this one, it's just that ultramarine blue and ivory black. Make it a little bit darker, and then just using white for that highlight, because that's going to blend in with that mid-tone, and it's going to look really good. Make sure that you're paying attention to your brush strokes when you're doing something like this that has more of a round circular shape. And as you can see there with the bottom part of the stand, I'm pressing down and doing like a whipping motion with my brush, and it gives a very nice highlight and it makes it look like metal. And that's exactly what you want. Now this microphone and the stand is actually supposed to mimic like old school broadcasting, because this is for a podcast. And so I really wanted to make sure that I captured that with the top part of the microphone, but I'm still doing this exactly the same way that I did the stand. Put it in the midtones, put it in the darks, and then put it in the highlights. That's the way that I like to do it. And then it just has, kind of like a little box going around underneath the microphone area with the New Station or podcast name on it. And at this point, I'm not going to be putting in the initials, which is TSIP for the Simply Incredible podcast. And if you have not checked out his YouTube channel, I would definitely recommend it. It's great for anybody that's into comics or baseball cards or, anything in that genre of, topics, I guess you could say. But this is actually for him, but I'm just going to be blocking in the boxed area for now. I will wait for this to dry, and then I will be putting in those initials, because it's going to be, if I start trying to put in the initials with it blocked in like that, it's going to start mixing, and it's going to be a mess. So that's a perfect example of where you just want to block in the base color and then go back in after that dries and put in the details. This is one detail that I had not put in yet, which is the diamond shapes on the Jester costume. So I'm just blocking in with a solid color, which is the ivory black, ultramarine blue, and putting those in because I don't want to forget those. Then taking a little bit of white and adding it to that one that's in that bright highlight area just to give it some dimension. You don't want to have that black and highlight area. It's not going to look right. And here's where I noticed, oh no, I cut off her arm. So I start to fix that. And you can see that whenever you have it blended in and you have that background coming right up to the subject, it just blends in perfectly. As you can see there with the arm, it's almost kind of hard to tell the difference between the background and the arm, but when you look at it in person, you can actually see it's just a tiny different color of shade there. And now I am taking a blending brush and just blending out the areas to make sure that everything has a nice smooth look to it. I'm taking it around the edges of Harley Quinn there to make sure that everything is touching, because she did still kind of have like a halo effect around the bottom parts of her legs. I can say is that it's really important to invest in a good blending brush, a mop for doing those big areas like the backgrounds. I personally really like the Princeton, I think it's Princeton Select is the line that I use for most of my mop brushes. They've always worked really well for me. They keep their shape, they don't fray, they clean up really well. And so, recommendation there. I really like the Princeton brand brushes. Now I'm going in to start the highlight process of Harley's face. And we know that the light is coming in there on the right, so I am taking just straight white and adding in some of those highlights so we can get the highlight and the shadow side of her face. That when I put in the background, I lost some of the highlights there on the little ball parts of her, the top part of her costume there, so I had to reapply those. checking the darks, making sure that they're dark enough. Sometimes when you put in that white, like I said before, everything kind of starts to get lost. And you could lose a lot of those darks that you put in. So I'm just putting those darks back in, adding in a little bit more of those highlights and darks that can kind of get lost whenever you start blending with the blender brush. So make sure that you watch out for that too. In the white parts of the eye. You know, it's really hard to see to get in any type of detail there, but I did want to go ahead and mark those in and kind of, you know, get that blocked out there. So I didn't forget to do those in the final stages. Thinking, I think these might be a little too thin, so I'm going back in and thickening them up just a little bit there on the top. This wasn't looking right to me, so I did thicken that up. I think it made a big difference. Sorry about the light changing here. I think this was actually a rainy day, and so you know, the lighting wasn't the best. So it does get a little bit darker here, but you can still get the idea. And I'm going in now with some gray to get the left side of the face and getting those shadows in there. And make sure that when you are putting in these areas that you have it going all the way up to the mask, just like you would with the background, because you don't want to have a halo effect, or you don't want to have any type of the underpainting showing through unless you actually want it to show through. So the last thing that I'm doing here is I am taking a mop brush. I use a 1-inch mop, and I am going over the entirety of the background. I do this just to give a nice, smooth, even look. Sometimes as you're putting on paint, it can get kind of clumped, and I don't particularly like that look. So I take a mop and I go over the entire thing just so it's nice and smooth and everything will dry at the same time. Highlights there that got lost with the fingers. That's another thing when you're using a mop. Make sure that you pay attention that you didn't lose any of the details, because sometimes that mop, especially if you're using a bigger mop, you can hit those areas and not even realize it, and then you lose that detail that you've been working on. Now I noticed that in this breast area and the arm area, it wasn't quite bright enough, so I'm going in again with a little bit of white, brightening it up just a tad, just to really show where the light source is coming from. Now, as you can see, the top part, even though the background is black and the top part of the hammer is brown, they're both so dark that it almost kind of gets lost. But so the reason what I'm doing now is I'm adding in a little bit more of those highlight colors, going a little bit more lighter brown, with mixing the burnt umber with some white, just to get the outline, because I don't want to lose that. And sometimes when you put these colors right beside of each other, they can run in together and then they just kind of get lost. So this is where having those darks and highlights kind of meet to really make things stand out is very important. Now the next video, I will actually be, this part of the stage of the painting will actually be dry. So I will be doing the final details of Harley. There's actually not too much more left to do with her, but I will be looking for any darks, any things that may have lost its shape, like her shoes or her legs or her arm, whatever it may be. And then I'll put in those highlights and those darks. And then there you go, you've got a finished painting of Harley Quinn. So that is what the next video will be. If you have not checked out the first video with the underpainting process, I will link that down in the description below. So make sure that you check that out. And if you like what you see, then please consider liking and subscribing to my channel. I plan on doing more of these. So, and if you do like these and you want to see more of these, then let me know in the comments below, and I'll start trying to, put up more content like this also. So with that being said, I will catch you in the next video.